A veteran and his dog found his late wife's hidden cabin. Then God sent the wind. They say the world does not always speak in thunder or revelation. Sometimes it moves in the quietest ways, in the hush between two breaths, in the way light bends when no one is watching, in the way a cold wind knows exactly where a wounded heart is standing. Perhaps grace arrives not as an answer, but as a presence, soft, steady, patient enough to wait beside a man who has forgotten how to hope. On a late afternoon that carried the last pale gold of winter, a man and his German shepherd walked the empty edge of Northwind Ridge, their shadows thin across the frost-hardened ground. The veteran, Elias Rowan, carried the posture of someone life had weathered without fully breaking, his steps slow but sure, his breath visible in the chilled air. Atlas trotted beside him, ears flicking toward every distant sound, as if measuring the silence itself. They did not speak, yet their companionship felt older than memory, woven from long miles and long nights when they were the only constants left to each other. The road beneath them was cracked, scattered with fallen needles from the pines that lined both sides like solemn sentinels. The sun hovered low, its light softening into amber as it met the lake beyond, turning silver hollow into a sheet of trembling glass. The cold held everything still. Even the birds quieted their wings as if nature, too, had paused to consider the small figure of the man and the dog crossing its threshold. Elias lifted his gaze to the ridge, his eyes tracing the line where the sky touched the tops of the trees. There was a heaviness in him, a tiredness not of the body, but of the memories he carried like stones in his pockets. Yet he kept walking, as though movement itself was the only thread holding him to the present. Atlas slowed, pressing closer to Elias's leg. The dog's breath left small puffs in the air, warm against the growing chill. The horizon dimmed further, gathering dusk in the folds of the forest, and the scent of pines deepened with the temperature drop. A quiet rustle moved through the branches above, too soft to be wind, too focused to be chance. Atlas stopped, completely, his body stilled with the precision of instinct honed over years, his ears pricking toward the darkening tree-line. A single tremor traveled along his spine. Elias followed the dog's gaze, but the forest ahead revealed nothing, only stillness thick enough to feel like breath being held. Then it came, a shift in the air, subtle yet undeniable. Not a gust, not even a breeze, just a change, like the world inhaling. Atlas's nose lifted, his tail lowered, his attention pinned to a point Elias could not see. Something was waiting, not threatening, not calling, merely there, like a door slightly ajar in a house thought abandoned. And in that suspended second, with the fading sun painting the pines in muted gold, Elias felt the faintest stir of a truth he could not yet name. Now, let us return to the one who will soon follow where that unseen sign leads. The man at the edge of the wind, Elias Rowan. The last of the daylight thinned behind the ridge as Elias Rowan stood motionless, feeling the quiet shift that Atlas had sensed before him. For a moment, he wondered if his imagination had shaped the air into something it was not, but the dog's steady posture told him this was no invention of grief or weariness. Atlas lowered his head, inhaling the faintest trace of something carried on the cooling wind, and Elias felt a small tug inside his chest, subtle but insistent, like a memory leaning forward to be heard. He stepped slowly toward the tree-line, boots pressing into the frost crust that cracked softly under his weight. The air carried a sharper scent here, a mixture of pine sap, earth, and something older, as if the woods had kept a secret sealed beneath its roots. The forest opened before them in long shadows, each tree standing tall and still, shapes drawn out by the fading amber light. A hush settled across the ground, the kind that arrives when the world waits before offering the next clue. Elias did not know what he expected to find. He only felt that moving forward was the first sure thing he had felt in months. Atlas remained close, occasionally brushing against Elias's side as though guiding him without force, simply lending direction through presence alone. They walked past a cluster of snow-tipped stones and a fallen branch that looked as if it had been split cleanly, not by storm or animal, but by intention. Elias paused, touching the brake, running his fingers along the smooth, inner grain. It stirred something faint, a whisper of familiarity he could not yet name. When he rose, The forest had changed its tone. Shadows deepened in the undergrowth. A faint drift of air moved through the pines, but unlike before, this breeze carried warmth instead of cold, as though traveling from somewhere sheltered. Atlas lifted one paw, hesitating, then placed it down with deliberate care, guiding them toward a narrow path almost hidden by fallen needles. Elias narrowed his eyes. It looked like only one set of footprints had ever traveled this way, and they were softened by time. He followed the dog's lead, and the forest grew narrower, the trees leaning inward as if gathering around a story that had not been told in years. Each step felt like entering a place that remembered him even if he did not remember it. The quiet deepened, so complete that Elias could hear the soft pulse of his own heartbeat and the faint crunch of Atlas's paws. Then another sign appeared, a strand of dried wildflowers tied loosely around a low branch, weathered but intact. Elias's breath caught. Claire used to braid wildflowers when they hiked, leaving small knots of them behind as quiet marks of wonder, never expecting anyone to notice. He reached up, touching the brittle petals, their faint scent releasing into the cooling air. It struck him that no storm had torn them down. No animal had disturbed them. They had remained, waiting. The wind shifted again, gentle as a hand brushing the edge of his coat. Atlas's ears turned sharply toward the slope ahead. He gave a single, low sound, not a bark, but a note of recognition, as if he had finally rediscovered a path he once knew. Elias felt it too now, a pull that did not come from sight or memory, but from a place deeper, the place where love and loss meet in silence. The woods seemed to guide him forward, not with urgency, but with a quiet certainty that what lay ahead was meant for him and had been for longer than he understood. And so he followed, unaware that with each careful step, he was walking closer to a truth his heart had been avoiding, yet longing for since the day the wind last carried Claire's voice. Away, the path narrowed into a gentle rise, and as Elias, Rowan, and Atlas climbed, the forest around them seemed to loosen its breath. The pines grew farther apart, letting in thin bands of silver light that filtered through the branches like quiet invitations. Elias moved slowly, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of a feeling he could not name, a strange mixture of dread and longing that tugged at him with every step. Atlas paced a few feet ahead, pausing often to glance back, his amber eyes reflecting the muted sky. His tail remained low, not in fear, but in awareness, as if he recognized something familiar in the air. The wind shifted again, just enough to stir the tips of the needles overhead. It carried with it a faint trace of something Elias had not smelled in years, the warm, slightly sweet scent of cedar oil. Claire had loved cedar. She had rubbed a few drops into her hiking boots each fall, insisting it kept the leather awake through the cold months. The scent wrapped around Elias like a memory brushing past his shoulder, leaving him still in its wake. He whispered her name once under his breath, so softly that even the forest did not bother to echo it back. They reached a clearing no wider than a small backyard, shaped like an oval pressed into the earth. Moss blanketed the ground in thick green patches, softening the last remnants of winter frost. The clearing felt strangely untouched, as if no animal had stepped across it in seasons. Atlas sniffed the air, circling the edge with measured steps. He stopped near an old log that had collapsed under its own time. His nose pressed toward a faint indentation in the earth beside it, a shallow dip almost hidden by layers of needles and moss. Elias approached, crouching to brush away the surface with the back of his hand. Beneath the moss lay the smooth outline of old wood, not part of the fallen log, but shaped by human hands, the top corner of a buried step, or maybe the edge of a small platform. Elias's heart tightened. This was no natural formation. Atlas nudged the wood gently, then looked up at Elias as if urging him to see what had been waiting here long before they arrived. The wind settled again, but the stillness it left behind felt different now. No longer a pause, more like anticipation. Elias cleared a bit more of the moss. The wood beneath was weathered but intact, and the grain pattern was unmistakable. Claire used to carve a tiny notch along the board she repaired, a habit she picked up from her grandfather. A simple mark, one small line crossing another, like a quiet promise preserved in wood. And there it was, her mark. Elias touched it with trembling fingers, his breath catching as though the earth had exhaled her name back to him. Atlas gave a soft whine, leaning into Elias's shoulder. The dog's warmth grounded him, pulling him gently away from the edge of grief and towards something steadier. The clearing brightened as a thin shaft of late sunlight slipped between the clouds, falling directly across the hidden wood. It felt impossibly intentional, like the world had chosen this exact moment to illuminate what had always been here. Elias looked around, slowly, carefully, realizing that the trees formed a natural circle around the clearing, their trunks angled just enough to shield it from anyone passing nearby. A secret place, a chosen place. His pulse thudded softly in his ears. The clearing held its silence, but the silence felt full, like someone waiting for him to take one more step. Elias rose, brushing dirt from his hands, and he followed the direction of Atlas's gaze along the curve of the clearing toward the northern edge. Something faint glimmered there, not metal, not glass, but the dull sheen of old varnished wood catching the last rays of the sinking sun. A door, half buried, half forgotten, yet unmistakably hers. And as Elias moved toward it, the air shifted once more, carrying a gentle warmth across his face that felt like a greeting carried on the wind. The half-buried door rested against the curve of the earth as if time itself had tried to hide it and failed. Elias Rowan stood before it, his breath shallow, not from exertion but from the weight of recognition pressing gently against his ribs. The varnished wood, dulled by years of weather, still held the faint outline of a carving he knew well, a single sweeping line crossing a shorter one, Claire's quiet signature left on every piece she built or repaired. Atlas approached the door first, nose brushing the crack where soil had settled against the lower edge. He inhaled deeply, then stepped back with a small huff, the kind he gave whenever he found something meant for Elias to see. The clearing held its silence. The late sunlight dimmed into a soft silver glow as clouds drifted across the sky, casting a muted sheen over the hidden structure. Elias crouched and ran his fingers along the top edge of the wood. It was smoother than he expected, almost warm despite the lingering chill in the air. His hand trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the tenderness of touching something she had touched, something she had shaped before life drew her away from him. He eased his fingers into the narrow gap and lifted. The door resisted at first, its hinges straining against years of earth and moss. But then it shifted with a muted sigh, as though exhaling after being held closed for far too long. Beneath it lay a shallow, descending passage framed with simple wooden planks. The scent rising from within was familiar. Cedar oil, faint but persistent, as if the place had absorbed her presence and refused to release it. Elias hesitated on the threshold. Grief moved through him in a quiet wave, not sharp, not overwhelming, but deep, like the slow settling of snow. Atlas brushed against his leg, warm and steady. Elias lowered himself into the passage, careful on the old wooden steps, feeling each one bend slightly under his weight. Atlas followed at his heels, paused silent against the worn boards. The passage was short, no more than a few paces, and opened into a small room carved gently into the hillside. It was not a cabin in the usual sense. It felt more like an intimate retreat, built by hands that valued quiet and intention. The ceiling was low, the walls paneled with smooth planks that curved slightly with the natural shape of the earth. A narrow window slit near the top let in the last weak ribbon of daylight. The space glowed with a soft amber hue, as if holding onto the sunset. Elias stepped forward slowly. The room was sparse but cared for. A wooden chair sat beside a small writing desk. A folded wool blanket rested on the seat, its color faded but intact. A ceramic mug rested upside down near a tin lantern, a thin layer of dust on its rim. These were not things left behind in abandonment. These were things paused. Elias touched the edge of the desk. On its surface lay a small stack of envelopes tied with twine, their corners curled with time. The top envelope bore his name in Claire's handwriting, a looping script that pulled breath from him the moment his eyes recognized it. He did not open it. Not yet. The room held more than letters. Along the far wall hung a narrow shelf, and upon it sat a small wooden box carved with the same crossmark signature. Elias reached out, then paused as a soft breeze drifted through the narrow window, though outside the air had been still. It brushed his cheek with surprising warmth, moving gently through the space and stirring the twine around the envelopes. Atlas lifted his head, ears tilting, watching the air with silent comprehension. The breeze lingered only a moment, then faded into the hush of the room. Elias closed his eyes, letting the quiet wash over him. This was not the end of a path. This was the beginning of something she had meant him to find, something she trusted the world to guide him toward when he was ready. And now, standing in the hollow carved by her own hands, Elias felt the steady pull of a truth waiting for him to listen. The small room carved into the hillside held its breath as Elias Rowan stood before the envelopes tied with twine, his name written in Claire's familiar looping script. He traced the letters with the back of his finger, as if afraid that touching them too directly might cause the moment to slip away. Atlas sat beside him, tail resting on the floor, his steady presence grounding the trembling in Elias's chest. The air in the room softened, warmed by the lingering hint of cedar oil. It felt almost like Claire had stepped out only moments before, leaving everything arranged just as she wanted it to be found. Elias untied the twine slowly. The fibers gave way with a gentle pull, releasing a faint whisper of dust that drifted into the air like a sigh. He lifted the top envelope and held it for a long moment, studying the slight curve of her handwriting. Then he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. When he unfolded it, the paper crackled softly, worn, at the edges as though it had been handled many times before being tucked away for him. Her words were simple at first. She wrote of quiet days she had spent here while he was away on duty, finding a peace in the forest that she hoped one day he would feel for himself. She wrote of building the small retreat with her own hands, carving each board slowly, letting the rhythm heal the worry that filled her during the long stretches when he was gone. She wrote of dreaming that one day, when the weight in him grew too heavy, this place would call him back to something gentle. Elias's vision blurred at the edges, not from tears alone, but from the swell of feeling rising inside him. He had never known she came here during those years. He had never known she built something meant to hold him long after she was gone. Atlas placed his chin on Elias's knee, a soft reminder that he did not stand in this moment alone. Elias continued reading. The next lines of the letter grew softer, the ink slightly lighter, as if her hand had shaken while writing. She spoke of the illness she had kept hidden as long as she could, not out of secrecy, but out of love, wanting to give him one last season free of worry before the truth pressed itself into their lives. She apologized for the days when her strength had faded, for the moments when he had looked at her with fear and she had no comforting answer to give. And then, near the end, she wrote something that made Elias's breath falter entirely. If you are reading this, my love, it means the wind kept its promise. I asked it to bring you here when your heart was ready to hear what mine could never say out loud. You were never meant to walk the rest of your road in darkness. Let this place be the light that stays. Elias lowered the letter, his hand trembling. The room around him felt alive with memory, the cedar scent deepening as though the walls themselves inhaled and exhaled with him. Claire had built this refuge not just for herself, but for him. For the version of him who would one day wander, lost and weary, needing a place to rest the ache that the world had pressed into him. The lantern on the desk flickered though no flame burned inside it, a tiny shift of air brushing the space around it. Elias lifted his head. A breeze had drifted through the window slit again, warm and slow, carrying with it the faintest shiver of pine and something almost like comfort. The envelopes rustled softly. The wool blanket on the chair lifted at one corner, settling again as if someone had brushed past it. Atlas looked up, ears forward, watching the movement with calm acceptance. Elias did not speak. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the breeze settle into him. Then he opened them and turned his attention to the small wooden box on the shelf, Claire's carved signature etched into its lid. Whatever lay inside, he sensed, would carry him one step farther along the path she had laid out for him long before he realized he would need it. The small wooden box rested on the shelf as though it had been waiting for the exact moment when Elias Rowan would finally have the strength to open it. Its surface carried the soft sheen of varnish rubbed thin by time, and Claire's quiet crossmark signature lay carved into the lid with gentle certainty. Elias reached for it with both hands, not out of fear of dropping it, but because touching something she had held felt like touching a moment frozen in memory. The box was warm, warmer than the room, as if the wood had kept the last traces of sunlight close to its grain. Atlas shifted beside him, lowering himself to the floor with a soft sigh, sensing the delicate edge of the moment without needing to understand its details. Elias lifted the lid slowly. It opened without resistance, the hinges barely whispering, revealing a small collection of items arranged with careful intention. On top lay a folded strip of cloth, the faded blue cotton worn from years of use. Elias recognized it instantly. It had been Claire's hiking bandana, the one she tied around her wrist on every trail they walked together. He lifted it gently, letting the length unfold like a ribbon of old summers and early mornings along mountain ridges. Beneath it were small objects, each holding a piece of a story. A compass with a tiny crack across its glass. A smooth river. Stone etched with a crescent by Claire's knife. A photograph tucked into the corner, edges soft from being held many times. Elias drew the photograph closer. It showed Claire standing in the very clearing he had just walked through, her smile relaxed, her hair tucked behind her ears, the sunlight catching the side of her face. She looked peaceful. She looked whole. The date written on the back marked it as taken during one of the months she had told him she was visiting a friend. She had come here instead. She had been building something for him even then. As he held the photograph, a soft breeze slipped through the narrow window slit again. It lifted the bandana slightly, brushing it against his hand like a gentle nudge. The air carried a warmth that did not belong to the cool evening settling outside. Elias closed his eyes, letting the warmth touch the places inside him that had been dimmed for too long. When he opened them, he noticed a small envelope tucked beneath the compass, smaller than the others, marked with a single word in Claire's handwriting. Later. He did not open it. Not yet. Something in the room suggested it was meant for a different moment, one he had not yet reached. He placed it carefully beside the box, then looked around the space again, seeing it with new clarity. The walls were not simply boards nailed into shape. They bore subtle markings, tiny notches that followed the curve of the wood. Claire had shaped this room slowly, almost meditatively, leaving behind small traces of her work as if signing each piece with her quiet devotion. Elias felt something loosen in his chest, not breaking, not aching, but releasing, like a knot slowly unraveling. He breathed in deeply, the cedar scent mingling with the cool earth beneath the floorboards. Atlas rose, stepping forward to nudge Elias's arm gently, his amber eyes calm and knowing. Elias rested a hand on the dog's neck, grateful for the steady presence that had carried him through miles of loss and toward this small sanctuary carved by love. A faint rustle outside drew his attention. The light filtering through the window shifted, glowing a muted gold as the sun dipped behind the ridge. The forest had grown still again, holding its silence like a lantern cupped in gentle hands. Elias lifted the bandana. Once more, letting it trail through his fingers before folding it carefully and placing it beside the unopened envelope. The breeze faded, but the warmth it left behind lingered in the room, sinking gently into the walls and into him. This was not an ending. Claire had not built this place to close a chapter. She had built it so he could find the beginning he was never able to give himself. Elias looked toward the narrow passage leading back into the forest. The wind outside had quieted, waiting, and he sensed, with a calm he had not felt in years, that the path ahead would reveal its meaning one step at a time, guided by whatever grace had led him here tonight. Evening settled gently over the clearing as Elias Rowan placed the wooden box back onto the shelf, its contents arranged exactly as Claire had left them. The soft glow slipping through the narrow window had shifted from gold to a muted lavender, brushing the walls with a quiet calm that felt almost protective. Atlas lay near the doorway, his head resting on his paws, eyes half open as though he were listening to something deeper than sound. Elias moved slowly around the small room, tracing the curve of the wooden panels with his fingertips. Every inch carried the imprint of her hands, her patience, her way of making even the simplest task feel like a quiet offering. He paused beside the desk again, letting his gaze fall on the envelope marked with the single word later. It remained untouched, waiting with a kind of gentle insistence that he was beginning to understand. Not everything was meant to be opened in the same hour it was found. Some truths asked for stillness first. Some needed the heart to steady. The air shifted slightly, drawing Elias's attention toward the narrow window. Outside, the forest had grown dark, but not silent. The wind had returned, faint at first, then slowly gathering as it moved through the pines in long, thoughtful waves. It brushed against the cabin's outer beams, creating a soft hum that vibrated through the walls. It was not a warning. It was not a storm. It felt like a presence, familiar and patient. Elias stepped closer to the window, watching the treetops sway. The rhythm of their movement echoed a pattern he remembered from years before. On the nights Claire would wake and listen to the wind as if it carried messages meant only for her. She used to say the wind spoke differently in places where a heart had something left to uncover. Elias breathed deeply. The cold air from outside mixed with the cedar inside, creating a harmony of scents that brought his thoughts into sharper focus. Memories surfaced gently. Claire standing on a ridge at dusk, her hair lifted by the breeze, her eyes closed as though she could feel the truth of the world simply by letting the wind touch her. She had always believed nature held its own kind of guidance. He had never questioned her belief, but he had not fully understood it until now. Behind him, Atlas rose quietly and walked to his side. The dog's gaze followed the shifting treetops, his ears twitching as if he, too, recognized something familiar in the wind's cadence. Elias rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. The warmth beneath the fur grounded him. A soft tremor moved through the room, subtle and brief, like a heartbeat pressed into the floorboards. Elias turned. Nothing had fallen. Nothing had shifted. Yet something had changed. It was then that he noticed the corner of the rug near the desk lifting slightly, not from a draft, but as though the floor itself had breathed. He knelt beside it, running his hand across the woven fibers. There was a faint rise beneath the rug, not large enough to be obvious, but too deliberate to be chance. Slowly, Elias folded the rug back. Beneath it lay a small wooden panel, nearly flush with the floor, its edges carved with the same crossmark signature Claire had used. His pulse steadied, slow and heavy. Claire had built this retreat with intention, piece by piece. She had left letters. She had left keepsakes. But this panel, this felt like something she meant for him to find only after he had taken in the earlier truths, only after the wind had guided him long enough for him to hear what remained unspoken. Atlas sat beside him, silent, attentive. The wind outside shifted again, softer now, like encouragement. Elias placed his fingertips against the edge of the panel, feeling the warmth of the wood, as though the years had not cooled what she left behind. And as he lifted it, he felt the strange certainty that whatever waited beneath was not meant to unsettle him, but to lead him with the same quiet grace that had carried him here from the very beginning. The wooden panel lifted with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for Elias Rowan's hands rather than resisting them. A soft breath of warmer air rose from the narrow space beneath, carrying with it the faint scent of dried wildflowers and cedar, a signature so familiar that it tightened his chest with quiet recognition. Atlas leaned forward, nose hovering over the opening, his ears tilting in that focused way he held whenever he sensed meaning rather than danger. Beneath the panel lay a shallow compartment lined with smooth, hand-sanded boards. Inside, arranged with deliberate care, rested a leather-bound journal, a small brass key on a woven cord, and a folded map that looked softened by time but not forgotten. Elias reached for the journal first. The leather, once a deep brown, had faded into a warm, earthy tone, with a few gentle creases along its spine. Claire had always preferred writing longhand, saying that ink carried emotion in ways no screen ever could. He opened the cover slowly. The first page held her handwriting, steady and thoughtful. She wrote about the early days of building this retreat, how she would walk through the forest listening for the patterns in the wind, letting it guide her to the clearing that felt most like home. She wrote about shaping each piece of wood, smoothing each panel, leaving quiet marks in the corners as promises to herself that she was creating a refuge, not a project. And then she wrote about him, not in sorrow, not in longing, but in understanding. She wrote that she could sense the weight he carried long before he ever admitted it aloud, and she wanted to build a place that could hold that weight gently, a place where he might one day remember how to breathe in peace rather than in survival. Elias closed the journal for a moment, steadying his breath. Atlas nudged his arm lightly, grounding him in the present. Next, Elias lifted the brass key. It was small, no longer than his thumb. Its surface warm despite the cool air around them. The key hung from a simple cord woven in a pattern he recognized. Claire had braided similar cords during evenings on their porch, her fingers moving with practiced ease as she hummed tunes she never finished. He turned the key over. A faint engraving marked one side, two overlapping lines forming a tiny wind symbol she used to doodle on scrap paper. The meaning of the key was not yet clear, but he sensed it was not meant to confuse him. It was simply waiting for its moment. He set it beside the journal and unfolded the map. The paper unfurled in slow, soft cracks, revealing a hand-drawn outline of the forest they stood in. Claire's careful script marked familiar landmarks: the ridge, the stream, the old fallen lake. But near the center of the map, drawn with darker ink and circled once, lay a small cabin symbol he had never seen before. Not this hidden room. Something else. A second place. A place deeper in the forest. A place she had marked with only one word beneath it. Listen. Elias traced the symbol with his thumb. His heartbeat steadied into a slow, purposeful rhythm, as though aligning with a truth he had only just begun to understand. Claire had built more than a sanctuary. She had left him a path, a journey laid out with intention, guided not by commands, but by gentle invitations. Outside, the wind shifted again, brushing the tops of the pines in a long, drifting wave that seemed to echo the single word on the map. Listen. Elias folded the map carefully, placing it beside the key and the journal. The pieces fit together in a way that felt unmistakable. She had known he would come. She had trusted that the wind would carry him to her words, to her places, to whatever waited beyond the clearing. Atlas sat patiently, watching him with quiet certainty. Elias rested a hand on the dog's shoulders, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the fur. The room, the forest, the very air around him seemed to lean in, waiting for what he would choose next. And as he looked toward the passage leading back into the fading twilight, he felt the first clear sense of direction he had known in years, carried not by force, but by the gentle insistence of love left behind. The air inside the hidden room settled into a hush so complete that Elias Rowan could hear the soft rhythm of his own breathing mingling with the gentle rise and fall of Atlas's. The journal, the map, and the small brass key rested on the floorboards beside him, each item holding a quiet gravity that felt less like discovery and more like invitation. Claire had left him a path, but she had also left him time. Time to understand, time to feel, and time to choose. He folded the map with deliberate care, running his thumb once more across the circled symbol of the second cabin deeper in the forest. The single word beneath it, listen, echoed softly in his mind, carried not by urgency, but by a kind of patient assurance. Outside the narrow window slit, the twilight had deepened into a soft blue shadow. The forest swayed gently with the wind, and the muted rustling of the pines moved in long waves, rising and falling as if the trees were breathing with him. Elias placed the key around his neck, letting it rest against his chest. The small shape settled into place with surprising comfort, its warmth a quiet reminder of the hands that had shaped this journey long before he arrived. Atlas stood and stretched, his paws tapping softly against the wooden floor. He moved toward the passage leading out of the hidden room, pausing to glance back, waiting for Elias as though sensing that the next step would require both of them. Elias looked around the room one last time. It did not feel like a goodbye, nor did it feel like a place he was meant to leave behind forever. It felt like the beginning of something steadier, something that would unfold gently in its own time. He extinguished the lantern flame that had flickered to life earlier, though he could not recall lighting it. The room dimmed to a serene glow, the last traces of dusk filtering through the window and settling on the wooden panels Claire had crafted. As Elias climbed the narrow passageway back into the forest clearing, the air shifted again. The mild warmth that had filled the hidden room followed him upward, wrapping around him like a soft embrace. When he reached the clearing, the sky had opened into a deep cobalt stretch, dotted with early stars trembling between the branches. The wind traced a slow path across the ridge, brushing his coat, lifting the ends of Claire's old blue bandana, which he had tied gently around his wrist. Atlas sniffed the air, ears poised, nose turning toward the darker stretch of forest where the second cabin was marked on the map. But he did not pull forward. Instead, he sat at Elias's side, waiting for the moment when the decision would no longer feel heavy. Elias looked down at the dog, gratitude softening the edges of his expression. The forest night pressed close, but not in a way that felt confining. It felt alive, aware, listening the same way the wind had always listened for Claire. He stepped to the edge of the clearing and let his hand rest against the trunk of a nearby pine. The bark was cool, textured, grounding. For the first time in a long while, he felt his breath settle deep within him, forming a steady, even rhythm that matched the sway of the trees. The journey Claire had laid out was not meant to be rushed. Whatever waited at the second cabin would reveal itself when he was ready to receive it. For tonight, the clearing offered a quiet shelter beneath the shifting sky. Elias knelt, smoothing a space in the soft moss, and sat with his back to one of the tall pines. Atlas curled beside him, pressing his warm body into the curve of Elias's arm. The wind gathered once more, drifting through the forest in a gentle wave, touching the clearing with a warmth that felt impossibly familiar. Elias closed his eyes and let the breeze move across his face, carrying with it a whisper of cedar, wildflowers, and the memory of someone who had loved him with a quiet, unwavering grace. And in that moment, beneath the starlit canopy and the soft breath of the wind, he understood, some inheritances are not meant to change a life in an instant. Some are meant to guide a heart back to itself, one tender step at a time.